was written before Genesis. So somebody that's with the patriarch time is talking about things that we already know about, but he's kind of talking about them not knowing for sure, but it ends up kind of being like a prophecy, if you will. We see it later on in the New Testament, things that he has questions about. And it's kind of almost like he's talking to God when he starts talking. And I think it was last week or week before, he even told his friends, "Are you going to answer questions for God?" And I put that together because I feel like he's talking to God out loud, but Zophar, Eliphaz, and Bildad are answering the questions that he asking to God. And I think that's why he said, "Are you trying to answer questions for God? Or are you trying to, he's the one that." Yeah, well, you'll just have to go. You had to have been there. So we're going to start Job, verse 1 of chapter 14. Man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. And that's absolutely right. At some time, we are all born of a woman. That's a fact. That's how you got on this earth. But at some time, you are going to have trouble in your life, period. That's just the way that it is. He cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continueth not. And he's just talking about how short life is. A man comes on the scene, he's born of a woman, and then, just like that, he's gone. And he's looking at it from, God's view of looking at us. You got to remember, it lasts forever. And in conjunction with forever, 70 years is like a blink of an eye. I think 1st or 2nd Peter said 1,000 years is like a day with the Lord. Ain't that where it's at? It's either 1st or 2nd Peter. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how time is with God. He even said earlier about the troubles of man flying upwards like sparks. That's how man is. It's just natural for us to be in trouble. And we got that from Adam and Eve in the garden. And actually, I think we got some... let me see where we got right here. I don't think we made it that far yet. It says he fleeth also as a shadow, continueth not. And you know how easy it is to cast a shadow and for a shadow to dissipate or be, the light to come on the scene and the shadow disappears. And again, that's just part of the poetry. He contrasts his two different things, just with human life being such a short and frail thing. And then he says, verse 4, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. And that was a question, and he answered it for you, not one. And this is Romans 5:12. I'm going to read it, and this is kind of Paul's insight. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and he's talking about Adam, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So if you go into it, you was born in sin, you were born from sin, and when you get to the earth as a child, the first thing you learn to do is sin. The first thing you learn is to cry for food and to say, this is mine, I'm hungry. It's not, if you've ever been around little babies, they're sweet, but they're not exactly nice about saying, hey, I'm hungry. You know what I mean? And that one thing, and this is the deal, and it's supposed to come across as even and this is why that he does it. Even if you've never done anything wrong, you were born in sin from sin by a sinful person, and you are not going to be able to come out of sin and be justified. And you're gonna. This is the point: is you need a savior. You need somebody to, make the sin right, and that's where you get Jesus, where Jesus comes into play. But this is Job talking. You got to remember, this is way on back here. 5, seeing his days are determined, and the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. And he's saying right here, God's decided how long your life is going to be. He knows how many months you're going to live. And he's not going to give you a minute longer than that. And that just breaks it down in just redneck, regular. Hey, that's what that verse says. He's determined the amount of time you're going to be here. And you're not going to be able to pass that amount of time. And that's the way Job sees it. Now is that the way that it is? Yeah, I believe so. I believe if you're here, he's got something for you to do. Otherwise, he would take you home. 6, turn from him that he may rest till he shall accomplish as a hireling in his day. And turn from who? You got to go all the way back to verse 1. Man that is born out of woman. God's going to turn from him, and he's saying, and he's asking God to turn from him that I may rest. He's saying, if you remember in the last few chapters, will you just, quit beating up on me? Let me just rest, that I could just finish out my life. And that's what he's saying right here. He's like, leave me alone, let me rest, and just let me finish my work out on earth. Let me just live the rest of my days out, is the kind of the idea here. And he's saying this with the thought that he's going to die. You got to remember, he's sick. He's lost everything. His friends turn on him, wives turn on him. He's probably not been eating real good. He stinks. He's got worms crawling out of his skin. It's a bad spot for poor old Job. And he's like, just, God, just give me a little bit of rest. Make the worms stop. Make my friends go away. Just give me some peace so I could just, die in peace. And then he gives this analogy. For there is hope of a tree, if it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that the tender branches thereof will not cease. And we all know that you can go and cut a tree down. If you're trying to get rid of a tree, you can cut it slap off at the roots. And next spring, around the edges of the roots, you're going to see new trees popping up. And that's his thought here. He goes, even though you've cut the tree down, it springs back up new life. And he's saying that because he's fixing to talk about man and how he is when he dies. And he's, verse 8, through the root thereof wax old in the earth, and the stock thereof die in the ground. Yet though of the sin of water, it will bud and bring forth boughs like a plant. And that's limbs. And that just goes to what I'm just saying. Even though the root looks like it's rotten in the ground, you've done cut the tree down, and you see one piece of a root going down through there, and it's done sprouted up new life. And you see it all the time, especially in shrubs and whatnot. And he said all that to say this, like I was saying, 10, but man dieth and wasteth away, yea, man give up the ghost, and where is he? And, if he gives up the ghost, he's breathing his last breath. When he dies, and Job's asking, where is he? And that's the question. And Job kind of feels like he knows the answer. So he's going to give the answer, and then he's going to kind of have a revelation. He's going to say, well, if God wanted to, or he's got this idea that he starts coming up with, and you'll see it in a minute. He says, where is he when he dies? And he says in verse 11, as the waters fail from the sea, and that means dry up from the sea or from the river, as water evaporates. and the flood decayeth and drieth up. And that's in correlation with life. Water's there and it dries up. And that's just like the plant earlier. It comes up and it dies. 12. So man lieth down and riseth not till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake, nor be raised out of their sleep. So he's saying, people are laid to rest. They're put, they're put in the ground, And the whole idea about putting yourself in the ground is hoping for a resurrection. That was the whole Christian thought about planting the people in the ground. They're hoping one day that, you're going to be risen. Christ, just like Christ did. That's the thought behind it. And that's why he's referring to all these other, being in the ground and the tree coming up and sprouting up new life after its death. But he's saying right here, he goes, they're dead. They're not going to wake up no more. They're now not to be roused from their sleep. That's what another translation says. And then, this is where the tables turn. He starts thinking and talking to God or praying. Maybe this is a prayer. He says in 13, "Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret until thy wrath be past, that thou wouldest appoint me a set time and remember me." He's saying, just if you would just let me die and put me in a grave and just forget about me until you're not mad anymore, until your anger is past. And you just mark it down on your little calendar up here. And when you're not mad anymore, you come and get me. And you think of me. And he says in verse 14, "If a man dies, shall he live again?" And that is a good question. We all know the question to this answer, but this is before Jesus came on the scene. He says, "All of the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come." And that's where he's starting to think, maybe there's going to be a change when I die. Maybe something will happen. Maybe something will change. And I wanted to look at 1 Corinthians because we see the change and we get told about the change. Good for it. We get told about this change when we have that second, that second life, that second. Let me just read it. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 52, and I've come up with this. It's not a little thing in my Bible, but this is what I thought about it. It says, "In a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed." And I'm wondering if that change that he's talking about right there is the change that is, in this description right here. And it goes on to say in 1 Corinthians, "For this corruptible must put on incorruptible, and this mortal must put on immortality." And he's talking about that new body that we're going to get. And I'm wondering if Job ain't come up with this just revelation. He's talking to God. He's saying, when I die, are you going to think of me again? Or, I wish you would. And bring me back to life. Our biggest fear in life is death. We come into this life. God puts us here from a mom. We're put on this earth this whole time. And what are we here for? But when we die, and I heard, I've been watching a lot of these podcasts and watching Phil Robertson and stuff, and he asked people 3 questions. It's kind of clever. He says, "How'd you get here, and why are you here, and what are you doing when you leave?" And he says, you were born of a woman, and we've established that. It's weird how this is all lining up with just Job. What are we supposed to be doing while we're here? the great commandment, go on and preach the gospel, preach that Jesus saves. Because when you die, you're dead unless you're saved. And then you have this incorruptible body that the First Corinthians was talking about. And I'm wondering if Job don't, have something about him that's got that hope. He didn't have a Bible to go to like we do. That's just something to think about. And he says, my appointed time will I wait till my change come. And he's already talked about, hey, put me in the grave and think about me. And appoint me a set time. And he says, when that time comes, I'm going to be changed. I think that's neat to think about. 15, thou shalt call, and I will answer thee. Thou wilt have a desire to the work of thine hands. And he's saying you're going to want to, you're going to call, and you're going to want to see your handiwork is kind of what he's saying. You're going to want to see that man you created. And, believe it or not, God created all of us from the dust of the ground. That's where he built us, designed us. You can't just look at this world and say, hey, it came from nothing. It was just like, boom, Big Bang Theory or something happened and everything just created itself. That ain't the way it is. There was a creator. If you could look at the human eyeball and how it works, there was some pretty precise stuff that has to go on to design this thing. And that's what he's saying. You're going to want to look at your handiwork. You're going to desire to have, you're going to desire to see me, to look at the work of thine hands. And he's talking to God. 16, for now thou numberest my steps, doest thou watch over my sin. You would guard my footsteps is the idea here, instead of watching my sins. And this is going to be your new incorruptible body. I don't know if this is doctrinal, but this is the way I'm thinking. When we're in our new body, there's going to be no sin, period. So he's not going to have to worry about your sin. And I think that's what he's talking about. You're going to guard my footsteps, and you're not going to be looking for sin no more. 17, my transgression is sealed up in a bag, and thou sewest up my iniquity. And I can't write on this. What does that mean? My transgressions, my shortcomings, my things that I've done to offend you are going to be put in a bag. They're going to be sealed up. And I believe the idea here is you're going to put all the sins that I've ever done in this bag, and you're going to throw it away. And that big hole that come out of me when you ripped all them sins out, you're going to sew that back up. You're going to sew up my iniquity. You're going to fix my shortcomings. This is the idea. And one translation says, cover my guilt. How many times have you done something and before you were saved, you would do things and you wouldn't have no guilt about it? You could look at your cell phone, or you could talk to whoever you want to. You can cuss, say whatever you want to. No guilt about it at all. But when you get saved, you got that guilt. You got something about you says, hey, you're doing something wrong. God is not happy with you. Well, when we get, that second body, there ain't going to be none of that. He's going to throw all that out the window. And even when you get saved, he throws all that out the window. God, Jesus' blood atoned for all of your sins. 18, and surely the mountain falling cometh to naught, and the rock is removed out of its place. But instead, and surely, and he's shifting gears again. You got to remember he's on an emotional roller coaster. He's saying right here, as mountains fall and crumble and as rocks fall off a cliff out of their place, 19, the waters wear the stones, and thou washest away the things which grow up of the dust of the earth, and they destroyest the hope of the man. Instead of doing all that, this is what he's doing. And I think he's kind of comparing and contrasting again with this poetry deal. I'm going to read it from a different translation. It says, as waters wear away the stones and as floods wash away the soil, so you destroy people's hopes. And I don't think God's doing that at all. I think, Job don't get to see the big picture. He don't get to see how his hard troubles are overcoming for everybody. For the next 3,000-4,000 years after that, it was a bet with the devil or whatever you want to call it. It's showing the devil, hey, the people on this earth can, trust in God and believe in God and not sin against God and not have, not do it because they love God, not do it not just because God ain't blessing them. I don't know if you understood that or not, but God, the devil kind of said, the only reason Job is loving you and prays to you and does such a good job is because you bless him. And that's the reason that Job's going through all of this is just to prove the devil a point. And all this talk to God is just his emotional roller coaster. It's kind of hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that has went through such turmoil. I couldn't imagine losing 10 kids. My wife just saying, hey, go die. And all of my friends show up, tell me that the reason I'm going through all this is my fault. I mean, that's a bad day, y'all. And I'm sure just what the things you would say to God through all that. And it was documented from a man that is better morally than all of us. He was the most just man at the time and probably ever. And he's one of the three that was mentioned in the Bible as being, God's most upright and just man, the faith men, So we get to see his thoughts documented, and it ain't all pretty. Wishing to be dead is not a pretty thought. It's sad. He says, you're wanting to destroy man's hope, and that's how he feels. 20, thou prevailest forever against him, and that's talking about the man born from a woman, and he passeth, thou changest his countenance, and sendest him away. A different translation. You got to remember, this is a lot of this stuff I can't understand either. It's part of the poetry. He goes, you always overpower them. This is verse 20 in a different translation. You always overpower them, and they pass from the scene. You disfigure them in death and send them away. 21. His sons come to honor, and he knoweth it not. And they are brought low. Lost my spot. And they are brought low, but he perceiveth it not of them. But his flesh upon him shall have pain, and his soul within him shall mourn. In a different translation again, he says, this is starting at 21, they never know if their children grow up in honor or sink to insignificance. They suffer painfully. Their life is full of trouble. And this is coming from a broken-hearted man that starts down low, and then he kind of has a little bit of hope that there's going to be something after death. And then he says, instead of that, this is what you're doing. And he's, his sons come to honor. And, he never got to see his sons get grown. Job didn't. And he's saying you just take people's families from them. And I wouldn't imagine this is a nice thing to say to God. Chapter 15, you're going to see Eliphaz respond to what Job has said right here. And it's going to go back and forth, I reckon, to about chapter 30. Yeah, 30. Yeah, I think it is 31. 32. 32, we're going to see a new guy, Elihu. And I wish there was more people here. Do y'all want to keep going through all this, just back and forth, or do you want to kind of sum everything? You want me to sum everything up between Job and his friends, and then jump to what Elihu thinks about it, and then, because that's 15 more weeks of what we just went through, this back and forth with his friends. It's really, really going to get redundant in the next few weeks. I'm going to have to pray about it. Y'all pray about it. Let me know what y'all think. What you think? What you think, Richard?
It was basically talking about the same thing that's done been talked about.
There's a few little nuggets in there, but
Yeah, but when it comes down to it, Job was trying to tell them, you know, he never claimed to be sinless,
yeah.
and he's trying to find out why God is doing what He's doing to him, because he wasn't sinless.
Yeah, he did. He definitely didn't deserve what he was getting. And the way his friends were talking to him, it's like, hey, you've got some major sin that ain't being dealt with. That's why God's doing this to you. And that's just simply not the fact. Yeah, and Job's just to his wits' end. He wants to die. He's sick. He's just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And he keeps wanting to talk to God, and his friends just give him their 2 cents. I would really like to see this in a play, because it's kind of set up like a play. If you think about it, you could set up the whole scene, the first part of the play being God and devil, striking up this deal, and then you kind of see this thing played out as the devil coming down and striking Job's sheep and all these things, getting all this stuff going, and just kind of seeing the little details of the devil's doing to Job, and then seeing the devil coming back to God, and then the devil coming back to Job and getting him sick and making his friends just turn on him, his wife turn on him, then making Job sick and just getting him the worms and all that stuff. The devil can only use a willing vessel. And obviously the devil's all over the whole situation, and Job just can't get away from it.
He knows how far he's going.
He says a lot here, though, and he kind of really opens your eyes to how short life is, how quick things can go south. We're not promised tomorrow. And he speaks about this, I wish that when I die that you'd mark it in the calendar and come back and get me. And we know that happens. And it's just wild that was wrote so long ago. And Job is hoping for that, has a hope for that. That just blows my mind. This is a long time before Jesus. And even Job talks about the one to stand in the gap, that'll hold God's hand and hold man's hand. And we can talk to God through him and stuff like that. It all points to Jesus. Even the book of Job points to Jesus everywhere you turn. And believe it or not, this book is in the Pentateuch, however you say it, Pentateuch. That is the Jewish Bible that they still use. It's the Old Testament that we have. the Jews, the hardcore old school Jews that read this Old Testament and live by it, never see the fact that it's talking about Jesus the whole time. They don't see it. And that's explained in a few different places. You know, their eyes are holden, is what it says. Forget where that's at. I think it may be in Acts. Their eyes were holden. It might have been in James. But, you know, if God don't want you to see it, He's not going to let you see it. It even tells you in John that Jesus came for His people and they received Him not. They didn't receive Him. That's why their eyes are holden. It was in John. That's where that's at.
You look back in verse 21, where it says His Son cometh to honor. He talking about Jesus there. God's Son coming
Maybe, yeah.
to honor.
Maybe He's not talking about His children. Maybe He's talking about God's Son.
And He knoweth it not. But look at that, where we done come from the first to here. If half of that would happen to you, would you still have faith in God?
Oh, no. I hated God for a long time for letting me lose my mom and dad. Took me right out of the game, right off the bat. I didn't believe in Him for a long time.
I don't know of anybody that
I refused to believe in God. I thought if there was a God, they surely wouldn't do that. You know, He wouldn't do that to somebody, just take their parents like that. So, yeah, that's rough. I mean, I couldn't do it. Well, that's why He's mentioned as, you know, He was mentioned with Moses and who else? We said it last week. He was mentioned with Moses and another guy as being one of the great men of faith is what it was. If the Bible mentions you as a great man of faith, buddy, you had some faith. That's just point blank. That's just how it was. It was Moses and I probably got it wrote down right here somewhere.
I have my other book. I got it.
But it seemed like in verse 16 it goes, "For now thou numberest my footsteps and doest thou watch over my sin. My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and thou hast sewest up mine iniquity." It was almost just like he was anticipating being resurrected and being not having to pay for past sins. All the sins that he ever committed just be wiped off the slate. I think that's neat. I'm sure that's what he was hoping for. So what do y'all want to do? We got 15 minutes left. Y'all want to have an open discussion, or nobody's discussing anything? $14, $15, $16, $17, $18. All right. Well, I guess we'll cut it a little bit short today, and we'll